Next, step 4. We need to figure out what you need to do to complete all those work products you identified in the last step. In other words, you need to identify your tasks and phases. Now, a project phase is a collection of logically related project activities that culminate in the completion of a major deliverable. So you'll have, for a house, you'd have a framing phase or a foundation phase, or for a movie, you'd have a script writing phase, and so forth. A project life cycle, in contrast to a phase, is a collection of project phases whose name and number are determined by the control needs of the organization. So you pull together all your phases and organize them in an overall project life cycle. Now, a key phrase here is the words control needs. Different industries create different kinds of deliverables. Therefore, each industry needs its own unique life cycle in order to allow for the control during the gradual evolution of deliverables. So, for example, if you're building a house, you're going to have a blueprint phase before you begin foundation and framing and interior finishing. The blueprint not only guides the quality creation of the deliverables, but it gives everybody on the team, including the buyer, the opportunity to review exactly how the house is going to look before they purchase it and before costly work begins. Here's another example of how project life cycle affords control for the developers. In an IT project, you would never begin development without solid design specs to work from, and you wouldn't create design specs until you'd done a thorough needs analysis or system analysis. So the IT industry has developed these important control phases to allow for the gradual and high-quality evolution of deliverables. Now here's an example of how I learned the hard way that I needed to build in more control in my project so that the deliverables weren't rejected by the client. This first needs analysis I ever conducted looked like this. I simply went out, did the analysis, conducted it, went away, created a final report, and brought it back and presented it to the client. Unfortunately, when they saw my finished report, they rejected it because I didn't talk to the right people and they didn't like my methodology. So now I identify variables. I've added an additional control. I start by identifying variables, finding out what is it that people really want to know, and who do they think we should be talking to, and that sort of thing. What are all the variables? Then I go away and come up with some tools and strategies, some guidelines for handling focus groups, some questionnaires for telephone interviews, or some observation guidelines, those sorts of things. But I don't just build these things and run with them all by myself. I go back to the client and confirm my assumptions and my approach and get their feedback and their cautions. And they'll say something like, well, you don't want to take this questionnaire to this customer, and you certainly don't want to talk to the people in Detroit about this or that topic, and so forth. So they adjust the way I use them. Now I'm ready to go out and conduct my analysis, because what I've done here is build in the checks and balances, the control points through the phases that allow the project deliverables to evolve gradually and in conjunction with the client. After doing that analysis, I can then create a synthesis of my rough findings, or a yellow pad. I just don't jump into developing the final report. I create what I call a yellow pad, or a kind of a quick and dirty review of the findings. That way they can tell me what to emphasize, what to do a little more homework on, and to get some feedback on things before I spend the time creating that final report. Now I'm ready to go and present the report. And this has been much more successful because it's lots of checks and balances, lots of control points, and lots of client participation. The object of the game, no matter what your phases or your project life cycle, is to avoid rework, to build in small increments, to create a little something, then share it with reviewers, get the feedback and approval, make revisions, and then create and refine some more. And just continually involve the reviewers and the stakeholders and the sponsor in looking at what you're building. This way, you never build more than you're willing to rebuild. Remember, throughout this process of figuring out what it is you need to do, figuring out your tasks and phases, you let your team's deliverables determine your project's life cycle. Build with a life cycle that carefully controls the evolution of the deliverables. So here are your targets for step 4. Figure out what you need to do to complete the work products. Identify your tasks and phases. In summary, it's a list of tasks or activities and phases inspired by your unique deliverables. It's a graphic depiction of the workflow among those tasks, whether it's one of those waterfall charts or a flow chart or whatever. And it's a description of the overall project life cycle, the relationship of one phase to another, and naming any bottlenecks. After we've determined our deliverables and the tasks required to create those deliverables, we can move on to step 5, estimate time, effort, and resources. Now, it's key here that we distinguish between duration versus effort. Now, duration is all about time. It's a chunk of time that we allow in our schedule for work to be done. Duration helps establish the calendar because it's all about time. Effort, on the other hand, is all about labor, work done. And it's the basis for making assignments, knocking on people's doors, asking them to help us, and also for calculating costs later on. So when we figure labor, we look at the number of labor units that are going to be assigned to a task and think in terms of the hours required for those labor units to complete that task. So for example, if we are laying a sidewalk, we may have a 5-day project. The first 2 days of the project is digging and laying the rebar and pouring the cement. We have 2 workers working 8 hours each per day. That's 16 hours times 2 days. That's 32 hours. So we have 32 hours of effort. In the meantime, we have 5 days of duration for the project because after they pour the cement at the end of day 2, there are 3 days in which the cement simply lays there and dries, and no one is needed, no more labor, no more effort is expended. So that's the difference between duration and effort. Now here's an example of an effort duration table. Notice we have the tasks listed down the left-hand column. This is for our writing project. And across the top, we have listed the resources that are going to be needed. So we have the writer, the subject matter expert, technical subject matter expert there, the client reviewer, and a research computer. That's another resource, but it's a piece of equipment. And finally, the last column is duration. So looking at the first task, discuss requirements. We have the writer working an hour, the technical subject matter expert an hour, and the client reviewer working an hour. They all get together for an hour, so that's a duration of an hour. The second task, develop the outline. The writer goes away for 8 hours. The technical subject matter expert we're estimating might be needed for 3 hours. We don't need the client at all, so that's blank. And the research computer, we budget to have it available for 4 hours. The duration, because the writer is working 8 hours, is overall 8 hours. In the next task, review the outline. We have been told by the client that they can't tell us exactly when they're going to be looking at the outline, but they want a day to look at it. So none of the workers, the writers or the technical SME or the research computer is needed, but 1 hour of effort is listed under the client reviewer. That's his effort. The duration is 8 hours. So it's sort of like that cement drying thing. We need 8 hours for the client review. In this way, you can total up all of the effort required by each of the resources. You can total up the time required by each task, and overall come up with an overall project duration summary. So for step 5, estimate time, effort, and resources, we come up with an effort duration table. These are our targets here. An effort duration table that shows all the tasks to be completed, all the resources that are assigned to the tasks, the effort hours that are needed of each resource for the whole project, and the durations, or the elapsed time of each task, and finally, the elapsed time of the entire project.